The moment I saw the cross-synced photo album pop up on the living room screen, a candid, blurry, utterly intimate shot of Victor and a woman whose face was not mine, taken in a city he claimed he visited for a solitary corporate seminar. The blood didn't rush to my head. It drained out, leaving me cold and utterly clear. It wasn't the searing primal scream of betrayed love you see in movies. It was the quiet, terrifying calm of a complex system administrator encountering a critical, irreversible failure. Victor, my husband of 7 years, the man who meticulously architected our life down to the automated coffee brew time, had spent the last 2 years optimizing his infidelity. And ironically, his devotion to technology was about to become his personal digital hell. Our entire life was run by the Nexus, a custom-built smart home ecosystem I, an IT security architect, had designed and implemented to perfection. Every light switch, every lock, every temperature fluctuation, every song played, every drop of filtered water was logged, analyzed, and controlled. He loved the convenience. He boasted about our optimized efficiency. What he didn't realize was that when you build the perfect cage, you give the jailer perfect control. My initial reconnaissance was simple, checking the network logs. The solitary trip logs showed continuous, dedicated local Wi-Fi usage at the hotel suite, including late-night streaming of a foreign romantic comedy neither of us liked, followed by simultaneous disconnection of his burner phone and her private tablet. Evidence, cold and irrefutable. I wasn't just going to burn his clothes or empty his bank account. Those were analog responses to a digital betrayal. Victor valued control and logic above all else. His greatest fear wasn't poverty or loneliness, but the loss of structure, the collapse of his meticulously ordered reality. My revenge had to be surgical, psychological, and entirely untraceable back to human malice. It had to look like a malfunction, a digital decay, a descent into technological madness. The setup began immediately. I created a hidden administrative profile on the Nexus, shielded by multiple layers of cryptographic camouflage, ensuring it didn't register on the routine automated diagnostics Victor checked every Sunday morning. I didn't need to brute force anything. I built the system. I knew the backdoors, the fail-safes, the debug tools I never thought I'd use for anything other than a software update. The first phase wasn't about disruption. It was about subtle conditioning. I needed him to trust the system less than he trusted his own mind. I needed to introduce the ghost in the machine slowly, deliberately, beginning the long, slow digital haunt that would dismantle his sanity chip by chip. The conditioning phase lasted 2 weeks, requiring constant monitoring from my temporary apartment, a secure off-grid haven I had prepared months ago, purely as a professional precaution, now serving a much darker purpose. The first psychological lever was temperature. Victor hated being cold. The Nexus thermostat was programmed to maintain an exact 71.5 degrees Fahrenheit, a setting he religiously adhered to. Every night, precisely at 3:17 a.m., when his REM cycle was deepest and most vulnerable, I dropped the temperature by exactly 2 degrees. Not enough to wake him fully, but enough to trigger a subconscious discomfort, a restless tossing that would break the quality of his sleep. He'd wake up shivering slightly, check the thermostat, see it flash 71.5, and dismiss the chill as a lingering draft or a temporary fluctuation. The logs, of course, would show no manual interference, only the automated return to the set point immediately after the drop. I repeated this every night, ensuring that even as the displayed number remained perfect, his physical reality felt flawed and inconsistent. Then came the music. Victor used a smart speaker in the kitchen for audio news briefs while making coffee. I introduced phantom playlists. Not loud, dramatic music, but quiet, almost imperceptible snippets of static or very old scratchy classical records, things he hadn't listened to since college. Sometimes just one single chord of a piano, played at 1% volume, then silenced. When he questioned the system, demanding, "Alexa, what are you playing?" she would respond dutifully, "I am not currently playing any media, Victor." The system wasn't lying. By the time he asked, I had already killed the invisible stream. He started checking his network connection quality obsessively, running speed tests, updating firmware, convinced a minor packet loss issue was responsible for the auditory hallucinations. I watched him through the kitchen camera feed, his brow furrowed in confusion, running his hands through his hair. He was attempting to debug an intentional, personalized sabotage, and the more logical he tried to be, the deeper he sank into the manufactured digital ambiguity. I was creating a system that gaslit its master, and the initial confusion was delicious. It was the calm before the digital storm, the meticulous calibration of the fear response. The escalation began with the lights, moving from environmental discomfort to overt sensory deception. Our home utilized smart lighting grids, allowing for precise control over color, temperature, and brightness, all scheduled based on the natural circadian rhythm. I started making the color temperature shift erratically, not full spectrum changes which would be obvious, but subtle flickers between a warm 2700K and a cold, sterile 4000K. The shift was fast, just milliseconds, but enough to create a persistent, almost subliminal feeling of unease, like the entire house was flickering under a dying power grid. When Victor was reading in the study, the lights would suddenly dim by 5%, then ramp back up immediately, a minor brownout that only affected his peripheral vision. He started complaining of headaches and eye strain. He called the power company, who predictably found no issues on the line, logging his complaint as unusual sensitivity. This phase required advanced timing, often triggered directly by his presence detected through motion sensors combined with acoustic analysis. For instance, if he walked past the hallway mirror, I would momentarily activate the voice assistant in the adjacent room, and then immediately terminate the connection, resulting in a barely audible electronic click, the sound of a device attempting to listen. He started checking behind doors and looking over his shoulder. He wasn't seeing a ghost. He was hearing the sound of technology waiting, watching, listening. The culmination of this phase involved the automated blinds. Set to open precisely at sunrise, I delayed their opening by exactly 5 minutes one morning. 5 minutes of unnerving darkness past the point of expectation. When they finally did sweep open, the sudden, brilliant intrusion of light made him physically flinch, spilling his coffee. He screamed at the blinds, demanding to know why the schedule had changed, but the Nexus simply reported, "Blinds opened at 6:02 a.m. as scheduled." The actual logs, hidden in my admin profile, showed the 5-minute intentional delay, erased from his user view. The house was becoming an unpredictable entity, a partner in his life that had begun to develop its own dark, mischievous will. Victor's attempts to regain control became increasingly desperate, playing perfectly into my script. He spent an entire weekend diagnosing the system, running diagnostic deep scans and manually rebooting the Nexus core. He was hunting for malware, for an external intrusion, for anything logical that would explain the persistent inconsistencies. I let him find minor irrelevant ghost processes, tiny innocuous snippets of code I injected that served no purpose other than to appear suspicious. He'd quarantine them, feel a burst of self-satisfaction for catching the digital intruder, and then the haunting would intensify. The smart locks were the next vector. We had a keyless entry system that required biometric verification, but I, of course, retained the master override script. I started scheduling phantom lock cycles. While he was working in the garage focused on a project, the front door lock would cycle 3 times. Asterisk chunk 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 asterisk, the heavy mechanical sound echoing through the house. When he rushed inside, heart pounding, the door was securely locked, and the security log showed no activity. I knew the sound alone was enough. He started double-checking the locks manually, twisting the deadbolts even though they were already digitally secured. The house was actively wasting his time and eroding his trust in physical security. His colleague Mark called during this period, expressing concern about Victor's focus during conference calls. Victor had started asking paranoid questions about network security during business meetings, tangential to the actual agenda. The digital paranoia was crossing over into his professional life, the area he guarded most fiercely. I observed him one evening attempting to disengage the main network entirely, planning to rely only on physical switches. That was my cue to deploy the high-risk script. I locked the network interface behind a mandatory firmware update loop, citing critical security vulnerabilities. The update would continuously fail, citing an internal checksum error, effectively holding his network hostage until he manually bypassed the entire sequence, something I knew he wouldn't dare do without contacting the manufacturer, which would be futile as the error was internal to the Nexus core. He was trapped in a digitally connected prison, unable to turn off the very thing that was driving him insane. By the time I reached the 5th week of this operation, Victor was visibly deteriorating. He had lost weight, the shadows under his eyes were deep purple, and his meticulous beard was starting to look neglected. He was sleeping on the living room sofa, refusing to use the temperature-controlled master bedroom, claiming the cold was too severe, even though the Nexus insisted the temperature was constant. Now was the time for direct auditory assault, moving beyond clicks and phantom music to fabricated language. Using the deep access I had, I exploited a known vulnerability in the specific model of smart speaker we used, allowing for the injection of synthesized low-frequency audio clips that sounded less like a computer and more like a whispered voice, just below the threshold of conscious recognition. When he was alone in the kitchen making toast, the speaker would emit a single, drawn-out whisper that sounded suspiciously like his mistress's name, Serafina. It was masked by the sound of the toaster ejecting, making him doubt what he heard. He would freeze looking around the empty room, convinced someone was hiding or broadcasting audio into the house. The fear wasn't just technical now, it was existential. The high point of this phase came when I linked the robot vacuum's scheduled cleaning route to the sound of heavy footsteps above him, utilizing the house's hollow wooden floor structure to amplify the low rumble of the machine moving erratically upstairs while he was downstairs. He looked up, convinced someone was walking directly over him. Except logically, the house was empty and securely locked. He ran up the stairs only to find the vacuum nestled silently in its charging dock, the floor spotless, the event log showing no recent activity. He started talking to the cameras half-jokingly, half-pleading, asking what it wanted. He was trying to rationalize the irrational. He was seeking a motive for the malevolent entity residing within his perfectly built system. This entire digital descent made me wonder. When betrayal occurs, and the response is not physical confrontation but a calculated, technological dismantling of the betrayer's reality, does the nature of the revenge change the morality of the act? Is psychological torment, masked as digital failure, a cleaner form of retribution, or is the intention to inflict pain always inherently corrosive to the soul of the avenger? If you had the ability to leverage a person's own technological dependence against them, creating a private hell they couldn't escape, would you consider that justice or something darker? I genuinely want to know what you think. Share your perspective on digital justice versus physical confrontation in the comments below. Let's explore the gray area of high-tech retribution. The house was now breathing. Every automated function was corrupted into an aggressive, unpredictable event. Victor's most critical reliance was on his morning routine, dictated by the Nexus. At 6 a.m., the automated espresso machine started brewing, the shower warm-up sequence initiated, and the news ticker scrolled on the bedroom mirror display. I broke the sequence entirely. The espresso machine would grind the beans, heat the water, and then, milliseconds before dispensing the finished coffee, it would abruptly shut down, leaving a high-pitched, mocking electronic whine. He tried to override it, manually brewing, only for the main water pump to stutter and fail, flooding the counter with sputtering cold water. The psychological impact of being denied the simplest comfort, a functioning cup of coffee, at the precise moment of need, proved immensely potent. The shower warm-up script I altered to flash between freezing cold and scalding hot water every 3 seconds. He abandoned the shower, resorting to quick, cold rinses, fearing the water itself. His hygiene suffered, and with it, his confidence. The news ticker on the mirror started displaying nonsensical, repeating phrases about unpaid debts and unsound minds before the display went black, simulating a hardware failure. I utilized the smart refrigerator, which was equipped with internal cameras for inventory management. I scheduled the camera to capture images of only the most mundane, repetitive food items, a half-eaten yogurt, a single brown banana, and display those images prominently on the kitchen hub screen, labeled with the caption, "Observation Stagnation." It was a constant visual reminder of his isolated, deteriorating life. He started eating out of the house entirely, driven away from his own kitchen, but the fear of returning home remained constant. He was spending late hours at the office, attempting to find refuge in a place where the technology, at least, was predictable and professionally managed. The fear was mutating. It wasn't just a technical glitch anymore, it was becoming personal. He started believing the house knew him, judged him, and was systematically punishing his choices. The climax of the haunting required a deep dive into the security camera feed manipulation. Victor had 12 cameras covering the exterior and common interior areas. I had already bypassed the standard encryption layers to access the live feed, but now I needed to manipulate the recorded evidence. I utilized a sophisticated script to inject extremely brief, seamlessly looped footage segments into the archival records. These segments showed things that couldn't possibly be real: a door that was already closed appearing to slowly, deliberately close itself again in the reflection of a window, a large ceramic vase on the mantelpiece vibrating slightly, then returning to stillness, a shadow moving across the wall in a room known to be completely empty. The crucial element was making the live feed appear perfectly normal, so his real-time viewing offered no confirmation, but the moment he checked the history, as he did obsessively every night, he would find irrefutable proof of paranormal activity. One night, I focused on the master bedroom. I inserted a short, 3-second clip into the archive showing the heavy draperies billowing inward, as if a window was forcefully opened, despite the exterior cameras showing all windows securely fastened and the weather outside perfectly calm. He watched the clip 4 times, his face pale and slack. The next morning, I introduced the physical trigger. I used a scheduled routine for the smart vacuum cleaner, the one that simulated footsteps, and adjusted its timing so it bumped forcefully against the closed bedroom door, followed immediately by the automated release of the front door lock, creating the sound of an entry. Victor was downstairs. He heard the bump, the release, and the subsequent silence. He rushed to the staircase, saw the door ajar, and bolted outside, convinced there was an intruder, or worse, that the entity was inviting something else in. He called the police from his driveway. The police arrived, checked the house meticulously, found nothing, noted the perfectly functioning smart lock, and logged yet another paranoid complaint. They suggested he seek counseling, noting the stress was likely causing acute anxiety attacks. My revenge had moved beyond inconvenience. It was successfully isolating him from external help, forcing him to confront the ghost entirely alone. Isolation was the final stage before the reveal. Victor now refused to sleep indoors, camping out in the heavily shielded, concrete-walled garage, believing the house's Wi-Fi signals were somehow poisoning his sleep. He had manually disengaged every smart device he could access, creating a chaotic mess of cables and inert hardware. He felt safer surrounded by raw metal and analog tools than by his interconnected luxury. My final digital assault centered on his last remaining sanctuary, his personal data. Using the Nexus backdoor, I leveraged his synchronized cloud backups. Over the course of 3 days, I subtly corrupted key files in his professional portfolio, not deleting them, which would be too obvious, but introducing subtle systemic errors in the codebases he managed for work, making them appear buggy or unstable. These were the files that represented his professional identity and success. He started seeing error messages pop up on his secure work laptop, files refusing to load correctly, minor syntax errors creeping into his meticulously crafted reports. He was losing control of his professional integrity just as he had lost control of his home. Simultaneously, I deployed the visual counterstrike. The digital photo frames scattered throughout the house, which he hadn't yet been able to fully disconnect, began flashing images. They weren't scary or accusatory. They were simple, innocent photos from our early marriage, our honeymoon in Santorini, the day we adopted our first dog, the celebratory dinner when he got his promotion. The pictures were overlaid with a barely visible, shimmering static effect, giving them the appearance of fading memories being corrupted by interference. These were the only moments the system showed him anything personal, and it showed them failing, dissolving. He watched one frame, fixated on a picture of us laughing, tears streaming down his face, not because of the memory, but because the digital rendering of that happiness was disintegrating before his eyes. The house had become a manifestation of his subconscious guilt and his decaying reality, and he was completely and utterly broken. The morning of the planned confrontation dawned gray and cold. Victor emerged from the garage, looking like a man who had survived a siege, unshaven and smelling faintly of oil and desperation. He was carrying a single analog suitcase, packed with essentials. He was leaving. He hadn't filed for divorce. He was fleeing a haunting, abandoning the fortress he had built. This was the moment I had waited for. I walked into the house, keying in the security code, a code he had changed 3 times in the last week, but which I had access to via the admin panel, and found him standing in the hallway, staring vacantly at the front door. The house was silent, every speaker muted, every light set to a perfect, unwavering soft white. The ghost had retreated. He looked at me, his eyes wide and unfocused, taking a moment to register my presence. "Anya," he whispered, his voice hoarse. It's gone. It stopped." I nodded, stepping further into the silent hallway. "Yes, Victor. It stopped. I didn't play the wounded wife. I played the systems analyst." I walked directly to the main Nexus hub hidden behind a portrait, bypassed the manual override he had rigged, and initiated a system restore. A clear, synthesized voice, the one he had customized years ago for the Nexus, echoed clearly through the now unmuted house speakers. "Welcome back, Administrator Anya. All systems operational. Debugging script Serafina protocol terminated." Victor flinched violently at the sound of the name. His eyes snapped from the portrait to my face, realizing the chilling, terrible truth in that moment. It wasn't a malfunction, it wasn't a haunting, and it wasn't a glitch. It was me, the systems administrator, the woman who knew his habits, his code, and his profound fear of the illogical, had weaponized his home against him. "You think you are so brilliant, Victor," I said softly, standing over the humming Nexus. "You built the perfect life and the perfect systems to manage it. But you forgot one rule of security architecture. The deepest vulnerabilities are always inside the firewall." I then initiated the final, most satisfying script. The entire house lights flashed red, and every speaker across all floors played a single audio file, the muffled recording of his voice, confessing the affair to his mistress during a late-night phone call he thought was secure, a recording I pulled from a cached VoIP session on his forgotten travel router. The ghost wasn't supernatural. It was simply the digital reflection of his own guilt, amplified and wielded by the architect he betrayed. The sound clip played only once, sharp and devastating, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Victor didn't deny it. He didn't scream or rage. He simply sank onto the floor, the realization of the scale of my meticulous vengeance crushing him completely. He finally understood that the terror he had experienced was not random cruelty but cold, calculated justice delivered by the person who knew exactly how to break him. I didn't need to yell. The house had done the talking. I walked back to him, handing him a printed stack of legal documents, the divorce papers already signed by me, listing all the evidence, both physical, the hotel logs, and psychological, his documented mental breakdown and police reports. "The house is mine," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "You are locked out of all professional assets and personal accounts associated with this network. I've already contacted your firm about your documented instability and the security risk posed by your compromised accounts. You have exactly 1 hour to retrieve your analog suitcase and leave the property forever. If you attempt to access the network or contact me, the entire history of the Serafina protocol will be uploaded to the public domain, along with the full confession." I had prepared every exit, every contingency. He was digitally erased from the life we built, evicted by the very technology he adored. He looked at the paperwork, then at the silent, pristine hallway, then back at me, the female fatale he had underestimated. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He stood up slowly, walked to his single suitcase, and without saying a word, walked out the front door, which locked automatically and definitively behind him. I stood there, watching the digital status of the lock cycle from secure to perfectly secure. The house was quiet again, no longer haunted, no longer breathing, merely awaiting its new instructions. The system logs were purged, the back doors sealed, and the nexus was truly mine. The revenge was complete. Surgical, untraceable, and utterly devastating to the man who thought he could control everything. If this story of high-tech retribution and psychological warfare resonated with you, and if you believe that sometimes the most effective revenge is the one that forces the betrayer to confront their own fracturing reality, then please show your support by liking this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Female Fatale Files for more stories of women taking back their power, one calculated move at a time.